All right, so let's talk about Passover. Now, before discussing Sinai, Passover, or theology later in history, it is important to understand the world Israel lived inside. Egypt was not merely a political superpower. Egypt operated on a fusion of state and divinity. In Egyptian royal ideology, Pharaoh was understood as the earthly manifestation of Horus, called the son of Ra, functioning as the mediator between the gods and the people. This was not casual symbolism. It was state theology. Order, fertility, protection, and cosmic balance were believed to flow through the person of the king. Access to the divine was structured through a human ruler. When the Torah describes the Exodus, it reframes the conflict in theological terms. If we look at Exodus chapter 12, verse 2, it says, "I will mete out punishments to all the gods of Egypt, I, the Lord." The plagues targeted Egypt's sacred order: the Nile, the sun, the livestock, the firstborn. Each strike disrupted something treated as divine or divinely protected. This was not simply political defiance. It was a dismantling of Egypt's religious architecture. When Pharaoh hardened resistance, the confrontation was not merely between two leaders. It was between two systems of authority. One system centered divine access in a man. The other system did not. The Exodus narrative does not present a replacement divine king rising from Israel's ranks. Instead, the story progresses towards something radically different. The defeat of Egypt did not elevate another human to divine status. It prepared the ground for a covenant built on a different foundation. That foundation becomes visible at Sinai, and that is where the real structure shift occurs. When Israel arrived at the mountain, something unprecedented happened in the ancient world. Revelation was not delivered through a divine monarch. It was not mediated through a royal body. It was not restricted to a priest king claiming exclusive access. It was national. From Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 12 rather. "The Lord spoke to you out of the fire. You heard the sound of words, but perceived no shape, nothing but voice." The emphasis is deliberate. You heard, you perceived no shape. The entire assembly stood at the base of the mountain. The covenant was filtered through a divine ruler. It was not embodied in a man crowned with sacred status. From Exodus chapter 19, verse 6, it says, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." A kingdom of priests. That phrase redistributes spiritual responsibility. Because in Egypt, mediation flowed upward through one exalted figure. At Sinai, covenant obligation rests upon the whole nation. Instruction becomes the center. From Exodus chapter 24, verse 7, it says, "Then he took the record of the covenant and read it aloud to the people. And they said, 'All the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do.'" The covenant is textual, audible, agreed to collectively. Authority is grounded in command, not embodiment. The prohibition that follows reinforces that structure. If you look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, verses 15 through 16, it says, "For your own sake, therefore, be most careful, since you saw no shape when the Lord your God spoke to you at Horeb out of the fire, not to act wickedly and make for yourselves a sculptured image in any likeness whatever." The absence of form is foundational. No image anchors the covenant. No body carries divinity. No ruler functions as divine bridge. Sinai establishes direct national obligation to instruction, and that structural shift sets the context for how the festivals are later understood, including Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Because before Sinai formalized the covenant, one night in Egypt severed the whole structure. This old structure was completely eliminated. On the 14th day of the first month, the command was with precision. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 6, it says, "You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all the assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight." The act was communal. Every household participated. The lamb was not consumed casually. It was eaten under command in preparation for departure. But the Torah makes clear that this was not meant to become an independent household ritual forever. Once Israel was settled in the land, the location of this act was completely restricted. And if we look at Deuteronomy chapter 16, verses 5 through 6, it says, "You are not permitted to slaughter the Passover sacrifice in any of the settlements that the Lord your God is giving you. But at the place where the Lord your God will choose to establish the name, there you shall slaughter the Passover sacrifice. The sacrifice belonged to sacred space in Israel. It was tied to the altar in the temple. And that distinction matters, because it doesn't mean that we just go around on Passover and slaughter lambs. The lamb marked the collapse of Egypt's order. It was a sign that the divine king's structure had been judged. Then comes the 15th day. From Leviticus chapter 23, verse 6. Let's read on. It says, "And on the 15th day of that month, the Lord's Feast of Unleavened Bread, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread." The calendar moves from sacrifice to sustained practice. Why unleavened bread? Well, the Torah answers without metaphor. It says, Exodus 12:39, "And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had taken out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, since they were driven out of Egypt and could not delay, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves." So they were in a rush. They were in a rush to get out of here, and they didn't have time to deal with yeast and letting it rise. They could not delay. Deuteronomy 16:3, "You shall not eat unleavened bread of distress, for you departed from the land of Egypt hurriedly, so that you may remember the day of your departure from the land of Egypt as long as you live." The bread preserves the urgency of that moment. Leaven requires time. Departure allowed none. So for 7 days, the nation reenacts the speed of deliverance. The lamb marked the judgment of Egypt's divine system, which completely collapsed. And the unleavened bread marks the immediacy of separation from it, the urgency of their escape from Egypt. The festival does not elevate a new divine mediator. That's what they were freed from. It preserves the memory of leaving one behind. Once the people entered the land, worship was centralized. The altar and temple was fixed in a chosen place. Sacrifices were regulated. Space mattered. But the Feast of Unleavened Bread was framed completely different. In Exodus 12:17 it says, "You shall observe the Feast of Unleavened Bread, for on this very day I brought your ranks out of the land of Egypt. You shall observe this day throughout the ages as an institution for all time." The language is about time, not throne. Sacred time does not depend on a crowned mediator. It does not require a divine ruler standing between the people and the command. The first and seventh days are marked. On Exodus 12:16, as we read, "On the first day you shall celebrate a sacred occasion, and on the seventh day a sacred occasion. No work at all shall be done on them." So the first and seventh day, there's no work. Work pauses. Households change rhythm. Diet changes. Homes are searched. Kitchens are used. In Exodus chapter 12, verse 15, 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the very first day you shall remove leaven from your houses. Completely removed from the house. And the action moves inward. Instead of approaching a divine king, each household removes leaven. It cycles each year regardless of throne, regardless of political power. The Feast of Unleavened Bread does not reinforce a mediator. It reinforces remembrance within the people themselves. That is a different kind of order, one not centered on flesh, one not dependent on embodied divinity, one sustained by instruction. After Sinai, after the calendar was established, Israel faced another internal test. The nation requested a king. From 1 Samuel 8:5, "Appoint a king for us to govern us like all the other nations." The request mirrored the surrounding world. A visible authority, just like they had in Egypt. Tangible leadership, something embodied. The response reveals the deeper issue. 1 Samuel 8:7, "Heed the demand of the people in everything they say to you. For it is not you that they have rejected. It is me they have rejected as their king." So God is allowing them to have a king, but reluctantly. God is very upset about this. This is a very serious sin. The covenant already had a king. It was God, the God that is unseen, the God that is not flesh, the God that not give birth to human origins, not enthroned in flesh, not crowned in gold, and not embodied. Even when monarchy was permitted, strict limits applied. From Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 19 through 20, says, "Let it remain with him, and let him read it in all his life. Thus he will not act haughtily toward his fellows." So, and if they were to have a king, it was permitted. It wasn't something that God wanted, But since it happened, it needed to be permitted and it needed to be controlled in a way that the king wouldn't just have all this power and be able to do all these things. So the king studies Torah. The king submits. The king does not mediate divinity. The Torah safeguards that boundary. From Numbers 23:19, God is not human to be capricious or mortal to change mind. Hosea 11:9, for I am God and not human. The Passover is something special because the Passover shows us what they left and what they left behind. And the 7 days that follow reinforce that line annually, because the departure from Egypt was not merely escape from labor. It was separation from a system where a human body functioned as divine bridge. The Feast of Unleavened Bread preserves urgency. The sacrifice marked judgment. The covenant established direct obligation. And from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4, we hear, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone." Hear. The covenant rests on voice and instruction, not incarnation. Passover draws a line each year. No divine king, no embodied mediator, no return to Egypt's structure. Freedom remains when that boundary is guarded. And let us celebrate this Passover with this in mind, that we are free from all idolatry,